protect yourself now, get it in the employee handbook, make sure that the employee handbook is up to date, and that's probably the best way to protect yourself.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Staying Power Podcast. Today, Brandon Hall and I are joined by Cynthia Hackler Flynn, founder of Hackler Flynn and Associates, a California-based law firm specializing in employment law. In today's episode, we discuss why Cynthia started her own law firm, employment law and common issues and lawsuits employers face, issues with paid time off and unlimited vacation, overcoming struggles of managing employees in a virtual environment, and productizing your services with courses. Cynthia, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. Would you be able to give our listeners a little information on your background?
Sure. My name is Cindy Flynn. My firm is Hackler Flynn and Associates, and we focus all on employment defense. As a kid, my parents ran a printing company, and I got to go in the business and see what it was like firsthand to run a business and what it was like to have employees. Over the years, several employment issues really tore my parents apart. And unfortunately for them, I was not a lawyer at the time. They ended in bankruptcy and divorce. But I knew early on I wanted to be an employment lawyer, not a bankruptcy lawyer, and definitely not a divorce attorney, but a lawyer to help small businesses. So in high school, I got a job at an employment law firm. I ended up being there for 8 years. And then I graduated law school, passed the bar the first time, and worked for a few different firms and then started my own practice.
Nice. So why did you choose to start your own practice, Hackler and Flynn and Associates? Why not just continue working, the W-2 path?
Good question. So I was working at a law firm, and everyone there had been practicing law longer than I'd been alive. Like they didn't believe in email. So we had one email address for our entire firm, and it would go to the IT person. He would print out 7 copies and walk it around to each of our offices. So I just knew long-term it, wasn't a good fit. So I went to work for another law firm, and my boss was amazing. She's been my mentor for like 20 years now. She's great. I was in court every day. I learned so much from her. And then she left the firm to start her own practice. And after giving it some thought, I'm talking to my husband, and he runs his own business. My dad runs his own business. My brother runs his own business. They're like, well, why don't you start your own business? I'm like, oh, I can't possibly do that. That's crazy. But
it's crazy,
I joined
everybody that I know is running their own business.
Right? Best decision ever. I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I got one client, I got a second client, I got a third client, and then quit my job. And my mom was like, but what about your health insurance? And it all worked out.
That's so funny about the health insurance thing, because when I quit Big Four accounting to jump into running the real estate CPA full time, my dad said the same thing. He was very concerned about the health insurance. And I was like, that's like, whatever, $500 a month. Like, I'll figure that out. What about just like living and just eating? That's the more important thing.
Right. It's so
very
funny.
interesting. So when did you start your firm?
6.5, almost 7 years ago.
Okay. And what does it look like today?
So today we are 4 full-time attorneys, 2 full-time paralegals, and 1 receptionist. And we're actually virtual. Brandon, I think we've spoken a lot about this in the past. And one of my attorneys, I've known her for 20 years. She was working at a firm and then left that firm to come work with me 6 years ago. And she's like kind of getting sick of LA, Orange County, Southern California. So she typed in Manhattan, New York came up, and she's like, oh, we work virtually. I'll just move to Manhattan, New York. Everyone's a little spread out.
A faster pace.
Yeah.
Good. So you basically you have an East Coast office now.
Exactly. Yep.
That's always fun to say to clients, right? I whenever I talk to clients, they're like, yeah, so where are you guys located? I'm like, well, we actually have 16 offices across the United States. And like, oh, wow.
I'm going to start using that. That is great.
Not technically a lie, so I feel okay.
Yes.
Anyway, so you run a virtual law firm. That's really cool. And I think that, at least my understanding of law, it's a little bit different to go virtual because you have to be licensed state by state. Is that right?
Yeah, you definitely have to be licensed state by state. And my attorney that moved across the country is licensed in New York, but we focus all on California law. Like California is our basis.
Got it. So they can live in New York, but practice in California as long. Okay. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's fascinating. Yeah. So CPAs, we have mobility laws that the AICPA has done a great job implementing nationwide. So it doesn't really matter where we live and work. And that's always one thing that I run into with attorneys though, because we try to refer our clients to attorneys and I'm like, well, where can you work? And they're like, well, North Carolina only or something like that. But I'm always like, you guys need mobility. You guys need the mobility stuff. You need to get the AICPA to come and advocate for you,
And California doesn't have reciprocity with any other state. So if you're licensed in California and you want to practice in another state, you're taking another bar exam.
California is a beautiful state. I have to admit, I went to San Francisco a while back to visit my brother-in-law. Absolutely beautiful. But they don't conform to anything. They just love to make it like, no, you're staying in this state and we're not going to make it easy on you.
Well, it's funny you say that. I was just talking to some lawyers in Boston, and I lead a group of lawyers where we give out continuing legal education credit for all of our meetings. And I was using it as a way to be like, oh, come check out our meeting. You're across the country, but it's a great meeting. You get continuing legal education. And they're like, wait, what is that? We don't have that requirement in Boston. I'm like,
oh, that's so wild. Unfair. And where are your clients based? Are they primarily California?
Yeah. They're all Southern California. So we have everything from, Los Angeles, and we're right outside of downtown LA. We're in Pasadena. And then we have clients in Orange County, Ventura County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, and San Diego.
Nice. Okay.
You're in Southern California. You have about 4 attorneys. What's your plans for growth over the next few years?
I love that question because if you ask me on certain days, I'm like, I want to get to 100 attorneys. We're going to grow this. We're going to be like massive. We're going to be the best and biggest employment defense law firm in the entire, obviously the state of California, if not the whole nation, maybe even the world. And then other days I'm like, 4 attorneys sounds great. I don't know about more growth. But all in all, I love it. And, I think our method has been slow growth, bringing on the right people in the right seats and really fulfilling the need that our clients have with employment law.
I think you just described the ups and downs of entrepreneurship because I experienced the same thing. It's we're going to scale this thing to the moon. And then other times I'm like, you know what? I actually just want to throw in the towel. We're actually too big and we need to downsize. How do you maintain that fire for growth? How do you hold on to that? We're going to be a 100 attorney firm. I think that's a tough thing to do. So when you're faced with the adversity that will always come if you're an entrepreneur, how do you look back to those during those times and kind of say, no, we're going to push through this?
I think it helps being involved in certain organizations. Like I am involved heavily in Entrepreneurs Organization, which we're a global organization. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but I sit on the board for EO Los Angeles, which is a nonprofit. It's a way to give back. But one of the things that I'm doing right now is kind of coaching a group of businesses that are between 250,000 in revenue and $1 million. So the whole goal is to get them up over that 7 figures. And I get so much enjoyment out of it and showing them like, these are the things that I've learned in my running a business that I can't wait to share. And I really think that helps with that fire and that excitement of like wanting to grow, not to mention my husband's a business owner and, it's like all our Saturdays and Sundays consist of walking and talking about either my business, his business, or another business that we're going to start one day.
And that's not a bad thing, right? Talking about business all the time. That sounds really nice. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about your actual practice, the law that you practice. What are some of the things, or what are the common mistakes that employers do, I guess, that set them up for lawsuits from employees? What are some of those key issues, or how can they mitigate risk to protect themselves?
Well, one of the things that we're really talking clients through is COVID right now, right? That seems to be unprecedented times, and every business in probably the whole world is dealing with some effects of COVID to a certain extent. And a couple of months ago, the governor of California shut down a lot of businesses, right? And businesses had to find if they were essential businesses or non-essential businesses, and therefore had to shut down. So a bunch of business owners decided to send their employees home. They don't even know if they furloughed their employees or if they laid them off. They don't know the legal ramifications of all of that. And one of our clients told their employees, if you're over the age of 60, you need to go home. Well, that's asking for an age discrimination lawsuit, and so it's just running things like that by an employment lawyer or by your HR person before you just act can certainly be helpful. And then when you have businesses where they sent home their employees to work remotely, it's making sure you're doing that correctly and in compliance with the law. Because if you have hourly workers, and I'm only really speaking to California, but if you have hourly workers, you still need to keep track of their breaks. You still need to keep track of their lunches. And wage and hour is a huge aspect in California employment law that exposes business owners unknowingly.
What would you say the number one thing that employees sue employers for is?
It's probably either misclassification or wage and hour. And what I mean by misclassification is that they had somebody working for them that they were paying as a 1099 or an independent contractor, and they should have been an employee.
Right, because California is pretty tough on that, right? They want you to be on the employee side more often than not. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because the whole Uber thing, right? That's where it all kind of, yeah. Okay. So what can employers do to protect themselves? I mean, it sounds like in that example where, hey, if you're over 60, you need to go home. It's not that they were intentionally trying to discriminate via age. They were just like, hey, you're in that risk factor for COVID and we don't want you to, die. So your protection, go home. I mean, is it just like before you're going to send out mass communications to your employees that could affect their job or pay, run it by an employment attorney? Is it as simple as that?
Definitely. I mean, whatever you're doing employee-wise, run it by your employment attorney in whatever state you're practicing your business in. That's going to be the number one thing you can do. And we're to the point where we only represent the best-hearted business owners. Like if they make a mistake, it's not because they're trying to, take advantage of their employees. It's just they don't know.
So is there any other major cases that you see that maybe, come in quite often that people should be aware of outside of those issues you just discussed?
So right now we're seeing, again, just in California, the governor had put a presumption in place, or there's a presumption in place, not necessarily the governor, but that said that if anyone gets COVID-19 in the workplace from March 19th through July 5th, it's presumed to be a workers' comp issue because it is presumed they would have gotten it in the workplace. And so I think we're going to see a huge rise in workers' comp issues. And whenever we see unemployment go up, we see a rise in workers' comp claims and employment lawsuits.
And why could that be bad for employers?
Well, because employees can get desperate. They're not getting enough money, they're not making ends meet, and then they turn around and sue their former employer or their current employer. Sometimes the person is still working there and you can't fire them for suing you.
But if an employee turns around and sues you because they got COVID, how would that work?
So the employee, they're not suing the business for getting COVID, but they're filing a workers' comp claim, right? And then workers' comp takes over. And then what we see, though, is oftentimes in California anyways, there are a lot of plaintiff side lawyers who practice both employee injury and employment law. So, where we've had a number of our class actions stem from for our clients is that they have an employee who files a workers' comp claim. 6 months later, they're now getting hit with an employment lawsuit saying that it's a class action, that nobody got their breaks, nobody got their lunches, and then it really opens up the whole can of worms.
Wow, that's incredible. Switching gears a tiny bit, still within the same subject, I always hear that you should have an employee handbook. Can you explain why that may or may not be the case?
Yeah. So when something comes up, oftentimes you're going to the employee handbook to see, right? Like if you have a question about paid time off and if there's a cap on it, or how certain things in the organization are going to be run, you go back and look at the employee handbook. When you download one off the internet or you don't put a lot of care into forming your employee handbook, you could open up yourself to liability if an issue out of it comes up. And so we recommend employee handbooks. We have one client in particular who's based in Santa Monica, and he does not believe in employee handbooks. He believes that everyone will just sign a severance agreement and you pay them off at that point. That is certainly one way of doing it. It's probably a little bit more costly of a way because not everyone is just going to sign off for a release, especially if they think that there might be some money involved. So, we're of the mindset of protect yourself now, get it in the employee handbook, make sure the employee handbook is up to date, and that's probably the best way to protect yourself.
And one of the things in the employee handbook is oftentimes the paid time off. Now, my CPA firm, we have what we call unlimited vacation. Is that exposing me to incredible risk?
So not necessarily. If your state has mandatory sick time, you want to make sure that that's accounted for and that people are, being allowed to use their sick time. There are certainly pros and cons in general of having unlimited PTO and not. I mean, a great benefit to you is that, you don't have to pay out accrued PTO upon termination, whereas if somebody's accrued, 40 hours of PTO, you have to pay that out. You just want to be clear on how often somebody can take the time, because if somebody goes out, say, I'm going to Costa Rica for the next 6 months, see you when I see you, you don't want to continue paying their salary if no work is being done. So just some sort of clear markers on expectations.
Yeah, unlimited's never actually unlimited, right?
There's always strings attached.
There's always strings attached.
Well, today we're riding a mountain bike. We're going to shift gears again. You mentioned you were virtual and you have staff, someone who lives in Manhattan. What are the challenges you face when managing staff and projects in general in a virtual environment?
Some of the challenges, in having a remote office is you can't see when somebody is clocking in for the day or clocking out for the day, right? And this was an issue that I had maybe 4 years ago when I hired an attorney. I was paying him a good salary. He said, yes, I want to work 40 hours a week, no problem. And then I looked at his time, because lawyers are all about billable hours. I looked at his time for the previous week and he had billed 22 hours. I'm like, hey, something's not right. I'm paying you for full time, 40 hours, and I only see 22 billed. And he's like, oh, well, I ran out of work. I'm like, oh, well, if you're ever bored and you don't have any work, let me know, because obviously I don't see you sitting there bored. And so one of the things that came from that experience was getting a list every Wednesday from all the attorneys in my office about their caseload, how many hours they're expected to bill next week, and a quick description of everything that they're doing. So if it's discovery on a case, if it's writing a motion, if it's drafting a demand letter, whatever it is, 2 hours here, 4 here. And I make sure everybody in the office has 40 hours for next week. Obviously, things change, and sometimes I'll get a sheet where there's only 30 hours a week, and then I'm coming up with something to help fill that time. Draft blog articles or do something from AdminRise, redo our employee handbook, any of those types of things. But it just gives me an indicator of what is going on next week, and that has drastically changed my business.
And it almost kind of sounds like a daily stand-up type of thing. Just maybe it's just done once a week. Have you ever heard of a daily stand-up before?
Like, I've heard of a daily huddle. What's a daily stand-up?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, which like every day you would just say, okay, what are you working on today? And then, you would see that, either everybody has a full plate or they don't, or maybe certain things need to be reprioritized or removed around in order to make sure everything is moving in the right direction. It kind of sounds like what you're doing is just like a weekly version of that.
Yeah, and I have a client who has everyone's phones ring at exactly 9:08 every morning, and that's when they do their daily huddle. Because of services like Uber Conference, where you can, set up a meeting time and it'll automatically call everyone's cell phone at the same time. That way, no one's waiting for others or anything like that. So I've definitely heard of things like that work well for businesses.
Do you ever run into an issue where, I mean, running a virtual firm, a virtual business is pretty tough to do just operationally, but also mentally as the owner? Do you ever run into an issue where you're questioning the time logged by your staff? Thankfully, no.
I mean, I have the best attorneys who work with me. They're way smarter than I am. And they are a lot of them came from insurance defense billing, in their background. So what that means is it's very tight. Like, you can only bill for looking at a letter a maximum of 15 minutes. You can't spend 2 hours looking at a letter. And so it's very, very rare that we have a client say, hey, this shouldn't have taken you that long. And if that's the case, I'll deal with it as a case by case, but we don't cut time. Like, everyone's very, very clean and tight on their billing.
What if you were to hire 2 more attorneys that you don't know much about? How would you feel at that point?
I know that's the hard thing about growth. I guess it would depend as that comes up. But I think setting the expectation early on, like when I hired my most recent attorney who's working for me, I told her at the beginning, I want a list every Wednesday of everything that you're working on the following week. And, and that was just part of it. So there was no, the expectation was just there, and it always gets in on time. So it kind of sounds like there's an onboarding period where the expectations are a little bit more intensive than simply logging your time, and until that trust is built. Right. Okay. Right. What about on the flip side, where people, because attorneys, CPAs, it's all about time, logging time, working 40 hours. But, you kind of get outside of the accounting and law industry where it's not all based on billable time. And you start talking to some of those employees and they just talk about, it doesn't matter how long it takes per week to get the job done. You just got to get the job done. Do you ever run into issues where your staff says, oh, well, I've already booked my 40 hours a week, so I'm good. I'll do it next week, even though you know that it needs to be done this week? And what do you do if something like that pops up? Yeah, I've certainly had that happen with, staff members of our team who aren't sure how to prioritize or get things done. And so what that takes is a sit down meeting with them of, okay, what are the top 5 things you're working on this week? Oh, number 3 totally can wait 2 weeks. It's not something that's time pressing. So just helping them with my expectations, managing that, and then also helping them with priorities. Okay. And my last question on the time piece of it, which you might get every once in a while, why track time at all? Why not just move to a fixed price model? I get that question a lot. And if I figured out a way to do that effectively, that would be great. But, it's like construction. Everything takes longer than you think it is. Everything is going to cost more than you think it is. And we've tried a few flat fee things, and every single time somehow 12, 14 hours gets sucked into a flat fee, and it just doesn't work. So I haven't figured out a good way to do that yet. But if you figure it out, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Well, it was something that we struggled with for a really long time. And frankly, I think that we still kind of do. So sometimes we'll go back and track time on certain projects to sort of see how we're tying up. One of the areas that we haven't quite figured it out is on our very large clients. We work with a lot of large, not a lot. We work with some very large real estate funds and syndications, $100 million type range. And we sit there and go, can we fix price this? And we're immediately very scared to fix price something like that, because you just never, you could be 6 months in before there's actually any sort of stability to scope. So we're still trying to figure it out in that instance. But we have
productized our tax planning on like more of like the individual landlording basis. And that's worked really well. But it took Tom, Tom really led that effort up. And it took him, how long did it take you, Tom? Like probably 6 months of tracking time pretty religiously and really trying to figure it out till we were finally like, okay, we know that we can do this scope within X amount of time. We also know that the market's willing to pay us Y, which is above what we were going to bill hourly. And it's worked out really well for us, but it's definitely like on the larger projects where we can't clearly define the scope and we just don't really know what's going to get thrown at us. We've kind of run into the same issue where it's like, well, we don't really, we take a massive risk here by fixed pricing, either that or you show your client like, here's the base fixed price and here's all the 500 scope increase items and what they cost too, which is overwhelming. So, yeah.
Cindy, what do you see in terms of your clients? And I know in the law industry, it's very common to have hourly billing, and it's clients usually aren't surprised by it. But do you ever find clients have apprehension around the not knowing how long things will take?
Certainly for litigation, it's just so difficult. The client gets sued, they come to us, and then we could resolve it informally with a phone call, or it could drag on for 3 years, or with our court closure right now, probably longer. So there's just so much unknown when it comes to litigation, and that's really where it's been a struggle. Because even if we've done 10,000 employment lawsuits, it's like you get a different opposing counsel, you do a different strategy. Those things can take more or less time depending. And then day one, the client wants to fight all the way to the Supreme Court. And after the fourth bill, they're like, okay, maybe we should settle. There's some liability here, and you kind of talk them down a little bit. But there's a lot of unknown in litigation, and that's definitely the hardest part to try and do a fixed fee for something like that.
One of the things that we've struggled with is like, we'll identify the client's needs and we'll say, okay, well, it's going to take between this time and that amount of time, or X dollars to Y dollars to solve. And the clients will always get kind of like focused on that lowest amount, or if it goes slightly above, or out of the range you gave them, not in their favor, of course, then they start to throw up their hands, get really frustrated, and don't want to pay the additional amount or whatever the case is. Have you ever had instances where that happened with you?
Definitely. In fact, one that's coming into mind based on what you just said is we had a client, I think they paid X amount of dollars. We came out under that, right, by like $80 or $100 or something like that. And we were trying to give her a refund, and she was so upset that it wasn't the price that she thought it was going to be, even though we were trying to refund her just a small portion. But like it ends up being this whole thing. And so with litigation cases, especially, we give our clients like a budget, right? Of like, these are all the things that can happen, assuming we go to trial and there aren't like major surprises. This is, you're looking at probably $100,000, $200,000 to take a case all the way to trial. So we do set expectations early on, just like we do with our employees, of this is what it could take. Of course, our motto is always, we're going to get you out as quickly and as easily as possible, but given all the unknowns, it can be years.
Is there any way to fix price some sort of ongoing subscription, or even like creating an employee handbook, I guess? But I'm just thinking in terms of, forget the employee handbook for a second. I'm thinking in terms of like annual recurring revenue for you. I've heard of general counsel or like outsourced general counsel kind of running at a monthly subscription. And, some months you don't use them at all. And then other months you use them heavily, but it all kind of like evens out in the end. Have you thought about anything like that?
I love that idea. From my research and looking into the California bar, you can't necessarily charge a monthly retainer of $5,000 a month and then do nothing for 2 or 3 months. Like, you have to prove your worth no matter what the deal is. That being said, though, and I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on this, is I want to come up with certain videos, mostly around hiring and firing, because those things come up for business owners all the time. And I wanted to do a series of videos and have specific forms that go with them. So if you're terminating someone, this is your checklist of 10 things that you want to look for. This is how they're going to react is one of 3 ways. This is how you can best prepare yourself for that termination, and doing something like that. And that way it's a subscription in a sense of like, it's a fixed fee a month. You get access to these videos, these forms, these checklists, these PDFs, all these things that will help you. And then with that, I wanted to do like a session every Friday or once a week where I would just answer employment law questions for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever it takes. Just see if anyone has questions that they're not sure of, which would be included in the monthly fee. So I'm kind of toying with that idea.
I love it. Okay. So Tom and I are literally doing this right now for the real estate CPA. So I don't have the answers from experience. I have the answers from theory and kind of what we're doing. But yeah, we're putting together a 6-week module, or 6 modules that we'll release 1 a week. And the idea is what you do is you try to get your email list like all jazzed up, and you try to pre-sell a bunch of people to get on these modules. And you create a waiting list, and you go, okay, it's Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. We're going live for the very first group, the founder group for our, the real estate CPA community or something like that. And you get 200 people in, and you've already pre-recorded all the videos. You've already put all the homework out. Every week they go through it. They make incremental progress. Like it's really, to make courses successful, you have to make incremental progress. So the people have to go through and feel like they're improving. So creating a handbook, for example, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. Like a module on that for an entire week. Here's how you create a handbook. Now come to the next, you have like a private group on the side that's discussing the modules as you go through. So go post in that group, an example of your handbook or a couple pages or whatever. But yeah, so you do that for 6 weeks. Then at the end you say, hey, if you want to continue this type of look and feel, if you want to join our community, if you want access to Cindy, then join our monthly or join our master group or whatever you want to call it. Basically, it's just a membership site at the end of the day. And you charge $100 a month and you get 500 businesses in there. And that's exactly what you do. Every Friday, you jump on, you do like a little webinar, but it's specifically for that group. And so what you can do is you can be posting content on your website. Like we post a ton of content. We have podcasts and all of that. But if you want access to Brandon or Tom on a live Q&A, you got to go join the membership group. And that's where you kind of make the differentiation. And then Brandon and Tom are going to go in there and email everybody back or Facebook post or whatever the group, wherever you're holding the group, but we'll be there answering questions. So I think it's a great idea. And it's also a great idea because it's something that you can downsell people to where, hey, look, you don't need to spend $100,000 on my services. Why don't you just go take this $5,000 6-week course? It's going to launch in 2 months. We do it twice a year. So don't miss it, right? You get the scarcity going and go join it. After 6 weeks, you can join this membership group and I'm in it and I answer all the questions and there's a lot of people and it's so much fun and all of that. But that's what we're trying to set up right now.
I love it. Will you let me know how it goes? I want to copy your blueprint. That sounds awesome.
100%. We're going to launch end of August. At least that's the plan. So yeah. And then what we're going to do the first round through, we're actually just going to we're going to say there's like 10 seats available. I think we're going to do 2 rounds, but basically there's 10 seats available. You pay $1,000, you get the membership or the founder rate, and you're going to help us create this. So you kind of like do the beta test with live people, and then you go and do the real thing later, and just it gets automated at that point. But that like something like that is great. And that's the thing, like when you have knowledge such as yourself, such as we do, people are willing to pay for that knowledge, especially if you are well recognized, if you do great work. And that's just so cool that you're doing something like that too, because that's we've literally just started down that road.
So, we're still riding through those mountains in California here. So we ask everybody who comes on the show this question. And was there any particular challenge you faced along your firm's journey, whether it be in the beginning or, even up till recently, that was so treacherous, so difficult, where you just said, you know what, I think that W-2 job just looks really good right now. I'm going to throw in the towel here on Hackler Flynn and Associates and just go back and go work for another law firm?
The biggest challenge has been employment issues. And that's what I do. It's like, in looking back and having that attorney who I was paying, a good amount of money to, a good salary to, providing benefits to, and then him not working. I had one client with that same attorney text me a picture of him at their office asleep. I'm like, oh no, this is not good. I care too much about my reputation. And so it's always very, very difficult to let somebody go, to have to fire them, to do anything like that. And so that's generally what comes to mind for the most challenging times.
That was while he worked for you? He was asleep?
Yep. He was at a client's office asleep.
Wow.
And
how did you handle that?
I get a text message. Well, I get a text message from the CEO, and he sends me a picture of my attorney at his office asleep. I called him and essentially said, we need to part ways. But yeah, but in working remotely in California, you have to give someone their final paycheck that day when you fire them. So you're either overnighting it to them and paying them for that next day is typically how that's handled. So even when you want to fire somebody immediately who's working for you, you still have to make sure you're doing it according to California law.
Is that the only time that you've had to fire somebody?
No. Unfortunately, I probably have a dozen people on the list.
Well, it's interesting because, just like a CPA firm, a law firm, your biggest asset is, at the end of the day, your people. And that also poses a lot of problems. But that's interesting that there you go. So employment law, still, we don't have it figured out either. People issues are tough. It's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing.
Yeah. One of the challenges we face as well is, and I think it's a challenge you face, is like making sure people are working, they're actually working in the virtual environment. They're not sleeping on the job.
Well, that's why I was asking you, Cindy, about the whole hour thing. I mean, what would the timesheet have looked like if you didn't fire them? Would that time have been billed?
Oh, I mean, you can't bill a client for your attorney falling asleep in their office.
But theoretically, if nobody saw or caught them, by the way, this disclaimer, nobody here in this recording would actually do that. We are all people of extremely high integrity. But I think what Tom's getting to is like, how do you know? And that was kind of where I was like going with like the time billing questions. It's like, you get this timesheet back. How do you know that people actually work?
Well, I mean, you have to trust your employees. They are putting your reputation on the line and your business on the line that you've spent years and years building. So if you can't trust them, they have to go. You have to release them back into the workforce. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, in a remote environment, it really comes down to trust and making sure that you can trust your employees that they're doing what they say they're going to do. And you can only put in so many checks and balances, right?
Yeah, I guess at some point it comes down to, kind of like you were saying in the beginning, the expectations. There's a little bit of handholding, making sure people understand what they're doing. And then like that helps build trust that they're actually doing what they need to do. And at some point you have to just trust that they're going to continue doing what they need to do on the job. And I guess that's just a tough thing to do, especially in a virtual environment, but it's got to get done.
Well, and I always ask in the interviewing process too, have you ever worked from home, right? Because it's not for everyone, right? Like I didn't think I can work from home. I just started working from home 2 years ago. But before that, I was the only one to go in every single day because I'm like, oh, I can't possibly work if there's laundry or if there's dishes or, all of these other things that come up. And now, of course, most of the world is forced to work from home.
So you do interview for trust. Because that was something I was going to ask you. So you start asking questions around like, have you done this type of work? Not like, are you necessary? I mean, I'm sure you go through the technical interview too, but you're also asking those sort of more like personal operating questions. Have you worked in a remote environment before? How did it turn out? What did you like? What did you not like? And is there a way, every time that we have employment issues where somebody gets let go or I have to fire them or something, I always think back to their interview and I start thinking, how should I have asked different questions to try to figure this issue out sooner? Do you do that? Or is there a way to interview people to figure out that somebody might fall asleep on the job?
I don't know, because if you ask, hey, Brandon, have you ever fell asleep on the job? You'd be like,
Of course not,
no,
Cindy.
of course not.
That's a weird question.
But I like sometimes you don't know, you need to ask, right? But I think that like doing a good job in checking references is really helpful too. I remember hiring one attorney and I called one of her references and he told me, well, she's really fun. And I'm like, oh, well, fun is good, right? But is it, like you want like positivity, good energy, good vibes, like, but when I think of lawyers, the last thing I think about is that they're fun, right? Like, I don't know.
Fun in
really
what way?
Paying attention. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like happy hour fun. I don't know. Right. I don't know.
Fun because they help you grow the business. Fun. Like what type of fun are we talking about?
Right. Well, and like something I also look for is like that they're passionate about the law, right? Like not every lawyer likes being a lawyer, believe it or not. And so to find someone who like gets excited about it and wants to actually help business owners is something that I try and scan for in an interview.
Yeah, I'll give just one tip, one question I asked someone during an interview, and I'm pretty sure this is it's like I just asked, is there anything going to distract you in your work environment that would cause you to not be able to get the work done and constantly be distracted? Because I think we had somebody who was constantly distracted by various external things going on in his work environment that we want to make sure didn't happen again. So I don't know if that question's kosher or not, or if you're allowed to ask a question like that on an interview, but I did.
I think that question is totally kosher. It's not like you're not asking about their family life, right? You're not asking if they have a newborn. You're not asking if they're married or any of those questions that would not be allowed. But I think asking if they're distracted, although, you may want to be careful with like, you don't want to ask if they have ADD or ADHD or anything like that, right? But careful on how you phrase it, I guess.
But it does get to the root of the virtual environment, and another way to ask it too is just, do you have a home office environment that's conducive to working remotely? Do you have a desk? Do you have a door that closes? Do you have a monitor? Do you have the technology? Do we need to get you any of the technology?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So one last question here before we wrap up for the day on this one is, if you had to do it all over again, if you had to redo your journey, would you have done anything differently?
The one thing that I did early on, and I think it just takes experience, is hiring the right people. Like for a while, I was like, oh, you have a pulse, you're hired. You have a pulse on a JD, even better, you're hired. And so really taking the time to find the right people. I mean, the personal assistant that I have working for me right now, she is amazing. I love her. But in order to find her, we had to do 50 interviews, like 50. So, good employees are out there. But sometimes it just takes a lot of digging to find that needle in a haystack.
Well, so how do you find them, and what does that interview process look like to know that you've got a really strong person? You talked about the references. What else do you do?
So we probably have like a 9-step interviewing process. I should write this down.
You should write that down, and you should create a course and a membership.
Yes, you guys can join. But I think the first thing you do is, you place your ad out wherever that is. We find good people on Indeed, which is probably one of my favorite sites, although I haven't done any hiring recently. And, you schedule a phone call with them and you reach out and say, hey, thanks so much for applying. Are you free for a phone call this week? And then you can weed out a number of people based on their response, right? If it's a sure, like, oh, do I want a sure person working for me or a fine person working for me? No, I want somebody who's like, yes, exclamation point. Let's do this. I'm free Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at this time, or like something that shows that they're enthusiastic, at least a little bit, about wanting to work with you. So that's kind of the first step. And then, I've had days where it's like phone calls every 15 minutes for 8 hours straight of potential new people. And if they don't call on time, it's a no. If they have technical difficulties now, like it's a no, like we're in such a technical environment, right? And then, you want to set up a Zoom meeting, see them face to face, maybe have other people in your office interview them as well, just to get a feel for their vibe, their energy, their passion. Obviously for law, we look at writing samples, and, writing samples can be good and bad, just depending, because sometimes they don't write their own writing samples that they send over, but at least it gives you a sense. So yeah, we have quite a few things in our line of when we extend a job offer.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is a critical point. Hiring people is absolutely critical, and having a process, and a lot of the ideas you just shared are great. And I think we're going to have to write some of these down for ourselves. So if our listeners wanting to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Our website, it's just www.hacklerflynnlaw.com. We also have some downloadable things on our website, like a checklist for hiring, bringing your employees back safely, how to reopen your business, have an employee addendum that you can add to your employee handbook that talks about COVID and the pandemic. Just some good resources there. A welcome back letter if you're having your employees come back, although now we're all shut down again. So there's some good resources there. And then you can always email me. My email address is Cindy, CINDY, @hacklerflynnlaw.com.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and drop that information down in the show notes for everybody who is listening. And Cindy, I want to thank you again for coming on the show today. It's been a fantastic episode. We're looking forward to putting it out there.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thanks so much, Brandon, for having me today.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, send us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.